This is the Reverend Barbara Hebner, UUA minister, retired. There were probably about 2 dozen people who had signed it ahead of me. I was aware that the tablecloth fabric existed, and I was genuinely gratified to be asked to be participant in that. It was a recognition that I had been part of the breaking the glass ceiling. And when back in those days, people were still talking about the feminization of the pulpit. And I was part of that blossoming that began to move us into parity. I don't remember the specific date that I signed it. I signed it on the West Coast, and I cannot at this point tell you for certain whether I was there because I was on the Women and Religion Committee or because I was part of the UUWF, the Women's Federation, which I was a board member for 6 years, I believe. And I was active in a lot of other women in ministry committees, workshops, and programs. And the specific context, the actual reason why I was there, I cannot tell you at this point because they overlapped a lot. As a very small child, the family went to the Hollywood First Presbyterian Church. And I knew as a babe in arms that I wanted to be in the pulpit, but I saw no women. There were no models. There were no role models in other denominations that I could borrow from. And so it was a self-hewn path towards ministry, but it became that internal imperative. I used to joke that I never thought the word call would pass my Unitarian lips, but it certainly did. And it was the right thing to do. And once I was there, my passion for social justice really had a place to work itself out. And I was involved not just in women's issues, but also for gay and lesbian issues. At the time, a lot of the men would not touch the issues because I think they were afraid of it. And so the gap was filled by people like me. It was a real privilege to be part of that. And the people that I was meeting and that were supportive, including many of the men ministers, but certainly the women, and then the opportunity to be part of the UUWF was important. And then Women and Religion Committee. And then when I was called to serve as the assistant minister at First Unitarian Brooklyn, I was called specifically by the women who insisted that the new assistant minister had to be female because they had had male ministers forever since the church was founded in 1820. And it, in fact, that in this century, last century, the 20th century, there had only been 3 ministers, a father and son. It had covered most of that time. And it was part of my self-imposed duty to get into the chapel of all faiths, a feminine face. All of the gods and deities from the various different religious traditions were all male. So the best I could do is I got Ceres in there, Ceres, the goddess of grain and wheat. After I stopped working as a called minister, I went to the University of Delaware, where I was the staff for the Commission to Promote Racial and Cultural Diversity, a natural fit under the circumstances. And it was considered by the denomination as a community-based social action ministry. And it was easy to do because I had already done the homework. It was particularly meaningful for me because in the family, we have a quilt that was signed by people in my grandmother's generation that had India ink signatures on it and her entire community. So this was something I was familiar with, and I knew how it had been cherished in the family and had been passed on from generation to generation. And I was also very familiar with Judy Chicago's work, and this seemed to be part of that same pattern of recognizing women as powerful. My sermons largely consisted of telling stories, Miriam and the One and Only Commandment, the life-saving pizza, all of the other stories that became sermons. I am particularly glad that we're doing this, because if we don't have the stories, it only is a piece of fabric.
My name is Paige Getty. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. And since 2003, I have been serving as minister of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia, Maryland. But before that, it was my great joy to serve as ministerial intern at the First UU Church of San Diego. What a meaningful, life-changing, joyful year I spent with you from the fall of 1999 through the summer of 2000. And at the end of our time together, on Sunday, September 3rd, 2000, the members of First Church ordained me to the UU ministry. And it was in that ceremony, with the Reverend Carolyn Owen Toll and other women colleagues by my side, that I signed the tablecloth honoring women who serve in UU ministry. It was a special time not only for me personally, but in our larger ministry. For so long, the professional ministry had been dominated by men, despite the countless and incomparable ways that women had been serving congregations for generations. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the official balance shifted. I was among the wave of women whose ordinations tipped the scales so that men no longer would be in the majority among Unitarian Universalist clergy. I will be forever grateful to those like Carolyn who cleared the path to make it easier for me to enter this vocation that has been so rich for me for more than 2 decades now. Just as I'm grateful to others who followed and are now leading as we continue to dismantle sexism and the gender binary and toxic patriarchy in our midst. Thank you all. It's an honor to share this milestone with you today, and you have my love and blessings on the journey ahead.
Hello, my name is Lisa Presley, and I was ordained to our Unitarian Universalist ministry in 1991. I'm so delighted that you are having this celebration of the tablecloth that you all created that helped support and sustain us as we entered ministry in greater numbers, we women, and helped transform the UUA. But the signing of the tablecloth was not the pivotal moment for me, but it was more what it represented and how both lay and professional women were transforming our movement. I remember very clearly my first General Assembly in 1984. I was finishing up my undergraduate degree because I thought I wanted to go into the ministry, and so it was exciting for me to be there. Yet in 1984, things were not quite the same as they are now. There was no welcoming congregation program yet, and I, as a lesbian who was going into ministry, didn't know whether or not there would be a place for me in my beloved Unitarian Universalism. And so I went to GA to hope to explore what was going to go on and how that might be. That year, one of the items that was up for debate was whether or not ministers should be allowed to perform services of union for same-sex couples. The motion passed, but not unanimously, and it seemed like there was a lot that needed to change in order for there to be a place for me. Yet, the inkling that there was a place happened at that General Assembly when I attended the UU Women's Federation meeting that preceded GA. This was a gathering of women who were engaged in the movement and wanted to make sure that it became a place welcoming for all. During that conversations that we had during the program, there were questions about how could the UUWF support lesbians and lesbian ministers in the movement. Someone said that one of the things they'd love to be able to do was to dance freely and openly at the General Assembly dances. With so few people in it, again being 1984, women risked coming out in a bad situation there. There were people who might not understand the risks that they were taking if they were to dance with their female partners. So very quickly, all the women in the room agreed that each of them would dance with a female partner, both fast and slow dances, so that it could provide cover for those of us who could not risk necessarily being outed in that event. It was a way that it helped me know that there was hope for me becoming a minister and being accepted in the ministry. I have served 5 congregations, 1 as a called minister, 4 as interim ministers, and now for more than half of my career, I have worked for the UUA helping serve congregations. But it was that pivotal moment of the UUWF women saying yes that I thought of when I signed that tablecloth. You then embroidered over my signature and have embedded me in the heart of your community, and I love that. So it was my affirmation and the affirmation of, I think, every woman who signed it, that we did belong, that there was a change afoot in Unitarian Universalism, and that it would not be a place that was closed to people because of their gender identity, their sexual orientation. You started a wonderful thing of celebration, and I thank you so much.
Hello, this is Kathleen McTeague. I am sending you this little video missive from Boston. Exactly a year ago, I was there with you in San Diego as one of your almost flash in a pan, very short-term interim ministers, and I remember that time with you very fondly. So I'm glad to be able to send my greetings today and a few reflections on the importance of the tablecloth honoring women in ministry. I started seminary in 1983, 40 years ago, when I was 27 years old. And I don't remember the exact year that I signed that tablecloth, but it would have been somewhere in the 80s, somewhere in between when I started seminary and during my first ministry in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I think that I know that I benefited from the women who went before me, many of whom entered ministry as second careers rather than my first career as a young person. And I think I didn't give a lot of significance to the tablecloth when I signed it. I had lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for long enough that I think I was in a bit of a feminist bubble and was naive about what would potentially face me as a parish minister who was young and female. Even then, even in the 1980s. So I don't remember the exact date I signed the tablecloth, but its significance has increased for me over the decades. Not the tablecloth per se, but the symbol that it is, representing this one way in which women pushed forward into a calling and a career that had not been open to us in the past. I know that when I started seminary, I began with quite a number of other women, but I knew no women ministers yet at that time. And I found out very shortly when I then got married and started to have my own kids that even then in the early 90s, there were very few role models of women who were full-time ministers and having babies. And I had even women in my congregation question whether that was an appropriate thing to do. So we continue to push forward, standing on the shoulders of giants as always. I remain deeply committed in my ministry now as a retired minister to social justice. And though I am most involved now with Spanish-speaking migrants here in the Boston area, I am also increasingly involved with guaranteeing the right to medical abortion for women, even in states where abortion is now being outlawed. It is a fundamental way in which women's equality has to move forward because there is no equality at all if we don't control our bodies. So I send you greetings again from Boston with the knowledge that you there in California, I here in Massachusetts, and hundreds of thousands, millions of women and men and non-binary folk continue to push forward equality for all. Happy celebration today. Wish I could be with you.
Hi, I'm Reverend Mary Moore. I'm in my 49th year of UU ministry, starting from back in my internship year, 1974. Following this full-time, full-year internship, I spent 25 years doing settled parish ministry, 5 years of hospital chaplaincy, and 15 and a half years of interim and transitional ministry. All of this was in the Midwest, except for 2 years of interim ministry in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was also in the year 1974 that I attended the organizational gathering of what came to be the Ministerial Sisterhood Unitarian Universalist, or Ms. UU. This inaugural gathering of women in UU ministry took place during the UUA General Assembly that year in New York City, and the gathering took place in a 2-bedroom hotel suite. There were about 40 women total in UU ministry at that time, but of course not all were present at that gathering. Those of us who attended this initial gathering, about 20 in number, we all fit sitting around the edge of a double bed, facing outward with our legs hanging down, or else sitting on the floor around encircling that bed on 3 sides. Not all UU women in ministry chose to become part of Ms. UU. That group sponsored 3 week-long conferences, the first one in 1977, just outside Cincinnati, Ohio. And then, in 1979, Reverend Carolyn Owenthal, who had always stepped up to offer leadership in Ms. UU, Carolyn brought a beautiful tablecloth to General Assembly that year. A tablecloth which UU women in ministry could sign, and then some wonderful, skillful, generous women at First Unitarian Church of San Diego would embroider our signatures. What an extraordinary gift. I personally was uncertain about whether I should sign my name, since I had some graduate coursework to finish before I was accorded preliminary fellowship status. And I had chosen to follow the rules and not seek ordination until I had done so, even though I'd been serving as minister in congregations since 1975. Again, the ever-gracious, welcoming, and accepting Reverend Carolyn Owenthal told me, "Oh, yes, please, go ahead and sign your name. And then you can add Rev in front of it as soon as you are ordained." And so I did. And that's the backstory of why the Rev before my name on the tablecloth doesn't precisely line up with my signature on the tablecloth. First Unitarian Church of San Diego can feel proud about your role in honoring some women in Unitarian Universalist ministry. Again, not everyone who signed the tablecloth was a member of Ms. UU, and some women in UU ministry from back at that time do not have their names on the tablecloth. I am hopeful that if this project were done today, that trans women and non-binary ministerial siblings, that their names would also be on the tablecloth. I close my portion by introducing you all to Reverend Jennifer Innes, the minister of the congregation where I am a member, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Peoria, Illinois. Reverend Jennifer was honored by our congregation during the service this past Sunday, March 19th, on the 23rd anniversary of her ordination.
It was my pleasure to be included in Ministerial Sisterhood UU by folks such as Betty Stapleford and Melanie Morell-Ensminger. Thank you to everyone who was part of remembering and celebrating Ms. UU. It was a privilege to be part of this group, and it is a privilege to be connected to its legacy and to continue as a woman in ministry in our great living tradition.